Hello world, PaperNun here. This is going to be a review or analysis of the dialogue between me and Site and Bruggencate on presuppositionalist apologetics. Now this isn't going to be a direct response because both me and open-air atheists have tried to, unsuccessfully, to engage him, and it seems to be the case that anytime it seems like we're finally making progress, he breaks correspondence and we don't hear from him again. So this is just me commenting on some of our dialogue as to not leave it buried on Facebook. Because it was an interesting dialogue to say the least. I think so. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole discussion point by point, simply because I'd like to address some of the more important issues that came up. And by doing so, if you think that I'm taking him out of context in any way, please refer to the link below of our discussion. So hopefully we'll all gain a better perspective on the issue. Now, presuppositionalism or presuppositional apologetics is the idea that knowledge or ultimate truth presupposes God, because God supposedly is the only one who embodies ultimate truth. Now, there are many versions of presuppositionalism, including the tag argument, but Zai's version is pretty straightforward. He usually opens up with the question, how can you reason that your reasoning is valid? Now, this is obviously a loaded question, as it is both misleading and poorly worded, but what he wants you to say is that you use your reasoning to reason that your reasoning is valid, right? Which he'll then respond with, oh, but isn't that viciously circular? Which is a nice semantics game, but fortunately for me and unfortunately for Zai, I am a linguistic philosopher. If you guys didn't know. A descriptive linguist, no doubt. So my response to his question was a little bit more on par. I opened the discussion by questioning his understanding of the term circular reasoning, because it actually doesn't mean what Zai thinks it does. Because, well, circular arguments are formal fallacies, as they have to do with the structure of the argument, not informal, having to do with the truth of the premises. But that aside, my main point was that Zai is committing to a concrete fallacy, because the term reasoning is not explicit, it is rather implicit, as it is categorical. There are many forms of justification, such as I can justify a formal proposition inductively, or a mathematical proposition with a proof, I go on to say. So it is clearly not circular to say that you can validate or justify your reasoning with your reasoning, when it is entirely contingent upon the kind of reasoning that you're using. After all, not all reasoning can be justified the same way, or even in the same logical format. But if what Zai is asking for is the basis in which I validate my reasoning, then I would have to say it's ultimately based on my cognitive apparatus, right? Now here's where I think Zai got sort of excited, as he may have thought this was the point of convergence, the point where he thought, at least, he could turn the discussion around. But in doing so, he sort of tipped his hand a bit, because I saw right through his sleazy, underhanded tactics, in which I might have otherwise overlooked. I'll explain. You see, Zai wanted me to give him a proposition that validates why my mind functions properly. But in doing so, he would have been able to sound his trumpet of circular reasoning. Well, how do you know that that proposition is invalid, since both the conclusion and the premises are inferred from the same thing? Yeah, I saw it coming. Now, what I said, rather, was that the statement is incorrigible, in which I meant incorrigibility, which has a different meaning in the philosophical sense, so don't get confused. Incorrigible beliefs are true by necessity of their own nature. Take the proposition 2 plus 2 equals 5. Now, even though this is wrong, it is still incorrigible that I understand what numericals and variables are in order to even make any kind of inference, right? Or, all right, let's use another example. Okay, this is very popular. I think, therefore I am, René Descartes. You see, to Descartes and his skepticism, we can't know anything external of the mind to be true with absolute certainty. But he concludes that to even make inferences or logical deductions requires, by necessity, a rational subject to do so. Ergo, I think, therefore I am. So here, even though we're talking about logical axioms, it is still incorrigible or necessary for Descartes to believe that he exists in order to even begin to make inferences about if other things exist. So, in response to Sai's question of how do I know if my cognitive apparatus is functioning properly, well, to even make deductions or inferences requires a properly functioning mind to do so. So the fact that I can reason out why my reasoning is valid means that I have a properly functioning mind. Well, Sai didn't like this. He wanted me to give him a proposition, like I said. He even kept repeating the same question over and over ad nauseum. So even though he kept on repeating the same question, I kept on responding the same way. Sai, logical propositions themselves are not only incorrigible, but also analytical of a properly functioning mind. Simple, right? But he then goes on to attack my proper use of the term incorrigibility, which is understandable. There's a joke in philosophy that if you can't attack a person's argument, attack their grammar. But he says that incorrigible beliefs can't be true or knowledgeable, and he uses this analogy of a person who is suffering from some sort of delusional psychosis. I'll read you the quote. He says, quote, "Incorrigible beliefs are not knowledge. A person suffering DTs may have incorrigible beliefs that there are snakes on the bed. This, however, does not make it true that there are snakes in the bed. Please try again." Okay. See, I told you he was getting agitated. But the term DT, not exactly sure what he meant by that. He could have meant delirium tremens? Something like that? Not exactly sure. But in any case, from reading the statement, it's fairly obvious he doesn't know what incorrigible beliefs are. Incorrigible beliefs, as I just explained them, are certainty based on logical axioms. They have nothing to do with psychological certainty or psychological states of mind. But Mr. Sai was fairly adamant on this point, in which I then referred him to an article on Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, stating, and I quote, "Psychological certainty is not the same as incorrigibility," end quote. Which I guess I shouldn't have done that, because that made him even more agitated. But he still denied it. He still tried to push his point about his little psychological analogy. Which, at that point, I had to ask myself, is he committing to confirmation bias? Because if he was, then there was clearly nothing I could do. I mean, I can't make him understand something if he's going to just blatantly deny it, even when faced with contrary to reason. So, I think it was at that point we sort of broke our dialogue with one another. I think, and he may not admit to this, but I think we both understood that there was no point in continuing, no way in which to salvage the argument, because his argument really boils down to a confusion of terms. That's it. And if you don't know your logic, then it's very easy for him to contradict you or make it seem like you don't know what you're talking about. In which you do, he just knows how to pimp out terms and make them work for him. Which is also something I've noticed about him, how he frustrates people. He poses a question and then he gets into this semantics game. But looking back on it all, one thing that really stood out to me was how he was really trying to slap down that incorrigibility argument. I mean, he really wanted me to provide him with a proposition. Because without it, he didn't have shit. He couldn't do his little hat trick. His little, oh, it's circular, see how it goes in circles? I'm sorry. Bruggencate, ladies and gentlemen. A one-trick pony.